I can see him in my mind's eye as if he were just stepping forward. He comes to the bent-over little widow who's struggling to make her mortgage payment, and he takes an envelope stuffed with cash. She takes it. Tears begin to pour down her face as she receives this gift and reaches out and just grabs his hand, and he smiles and sneaks away. And on his way home, he goes by a stand with a couple of kids there trying to be entrepreneurs and sell their lemonade, and he goes and buys a whole truckload of lemonade. As they giggle and try to act so mature, he recognizes the joy of helping others. It's not just these events of this day, it's an ongoing act with him. The hope for healing. He has sponsored 12 different girls through this survival program for abused women, and he's taken them step by step. He's not only done that, but for his own children, he comes to his son and whispers to him what it means to connect with his wife and tells her to bring some flowers to her once in a while. And then he bows down and prays a hedge around the family. And just in case any of them have committed sin, he makes an offering on their behalf. He hated sin, loved. There were so many God's man. When I say multiplied tokens, I'm not just talking about a few little things. It's 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, 500 donkeys, servants and field workers multiplied. God himself had judged Job worthy of his blessing. So when others looked at Job, they saw a righteous man. In their mind, they believed God blessed him. So God desires to shower blessings on those who would completely yield, their lives to him, and it makes sense, right? That says you're going to use. He was the poster boy, one that parents would, you need to be like Job. Watch Job. Look at how Job does that. But then, it falls apart. The Sabaeans killed Job's servant. The one that survived him exactly what happened. No sooner does he finish than another servant comes balls of lightning, sheep and shepherds, just some miraculous incident. Another servant comes and had attacked, killed his servant, and taken his camels. With that, when the new servant comes, he's expecting something. A hurricane-force wind, the servant announces, hit the house with such devastating effect, completely killing all of his family. All of his blessings wiped out in one fell swoop. Oh, I should mention that Job's wife was spared. When you find how the story unfolds, you'll agree with me. Job appeared to no longer enjoy God's blessing, but we ask why. And I'm sure we're not the only ones. Because all of the surrounding friends of Job and Job. Had God ceased to be a sovereign, maybe he ceased being a good. Or perhaps he was in a mood swing that caused him to involuntarily lash out. That Job's sin made God's goodness. When those kinds of things tear our lives up, and it's easy to say, God, what's going on here? Do you have it together? In the back of the curtain, we get to see behind the scenes a picture on. And oftentimes, things happen behind the scenes that we just miss. Eugene's in the back seat of the car, and he's there prodding his back and forth again and again. Aaron on for him, he just keeps moving further and further away from his brother, and he tries to ignore Eugene. Eugene won't let Aaron alone. Finally, Aaron has had enough, and he turns and punches his brother right at the same time who mother's in the front seat turns around and sees. She pulls over to the side, pulls out of the car. Aaron has been the victim of this. It was a final lap, but the daughter was the one who kept prompting him and punishing him and him. It was really overhead, as we sometimes assign to mother. Caught a snapshot and in a wrong sense. And because of that, the wrong brother. It's so easy to only have a small select snapshot of the information that we miss the whole picture. Mothers or kids. Picture with me being in a dining hall, and you're there, and all of a sudden, as you're eating and enjoying your meal, across from you, you see a man push back another man and take a knife and lunge it into his throat. Immediately, all around you, you're screaming, and people every direction that they can, and you're looking and thinking, wow, what is going on here? And you have a moment to consider. I pause for a minute and interrupt the picture and say, would you hire this man? Would you invite him to dinner? The one with the knife, who's just interested in the other man's throat, the one who's knocked on the floor. Would you cause him to date your daughter? Let me tell you the rest of the story. Find out perspective that this man actually is a doctor, and the one that's on his best friends. Suddenly, the man that you would disown, you want to make a hero, invite him to a party, maybe even date your daughter. What changed? The man still lunged at somebody else, but now you have a fuller picture of all that's going on. Sometimes we only get a snapshot of God that's misplaced, and we miss the picture. God in the book of Job pulls back the screen to give us a full perspective of what's going on, and it's amazing that he does. If you would, Job's story claims Job, but it goes back and then tells us the picture of how this started. There was a meeting in heaven. According to Job 1:6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." If you would paraphrase God saying, what planet are you claiming to represent? By what authority do you come to this gathering of the hosts of the universe? And Satan's answer from through back and forth on the earth, you see, the earth is mine. And God, in his vindication, says, have you considered my servant Job, Job 1:8, have you considered he serves you because of what if you would, he views you as nothing more than a heavenly sugar daddy. It's not that he loves you, it's that he wants what he gets from you. It's the riches that he loves. So if you took these things away, he would curse you to your face. That's the picture of the great controversy struggle. That's the original picture that we get of how that takes place on earth. The struggle that is here, that viewing of the challenge between God and Satan. Oh, but there's so much more here than just that exchange. There's a revelation of character. Satan tempts God to strike Job's family and wealth. And God refuses. Did you catch it? If you will strike him, if you will put your hand on him, have you not made a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But reach out with your hand now and touch all that he has. He will certainly curse you to your face. But God refuses. That's not how I act. That's not who I am. Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only reach out and put your hand on him. In other words, you can touch his things, just not him. Now, imagine that picture that we opened with, right? All of that, I repeat. In all of the Old Testament, Satan's mentioned by name only in 3 passages. That's it on your screen. Why? Well, I think there's a special exception in Job because God wants to open the picture. But all the rest refer to him in images and pictures. Because in a world where they were worshiping everything, one of the things that they did is worship the evil gods more than they worship the good gods. Because they were more afraid of the pain that they would be in than receiving benefit. So they would give extra offerings to the gods who could destroy them and punish them. So they ended up, in that sense, exalting that. So in a place where God is the only God, he didn't want to set them up to worship Satan. Is it making sense to you? So God is willing, in a generic, to take all the punishment upon himself, all the misunderstanding upon himself, and to help them perceive that it's not him. The contrast between divinity and angel is strong. He wants them to know there's one Lord, one God. The Lord is one. There's not a good God and a bad God. Are you with me? It's so important to move forward. Those pictures are not from Scripture's perspective of God. There's one God. And evil came as a result, as we studied a little bit earlier, evil came as a result of God giving the opportunity to choose. We'll come back to that in a bit. Satan in his very name means the adversary, the enemy, the one who is against us. And the devil means the accuser, the slanderer. The names that are there are who he is and what he does. So when we look at the understanding of Satan and the devil, it's talking about how he's moving against us. Jesus came to earth to enlighten mankind concerning God's true character, so they could see how God wants to respond. Now, imagine a whole generation after generation of the Israelites who've gone through this misunderstanding of who God is and built up this caricature of God whose main attribute is stern, exacting justice, with virtually no picture of grace. But not only does Jesus come to enlighten mankind about God's character, he comes to expose Satan's nature and his role as a propaganda artist. You have to understand that Satan does everything he can, just like we saw Eugene and Aaron. Eugene slaps his brother and finally gets a response and then blames his brother. There's an action in war that's called false flag terrorism. If you don't understand what that is, it came and originated from those who were going out to try to get others to fight the battle against other colonies. So what they would do is with their ships, they would raise the flag of another colony and attack their own people in order to raise an army against that other country. Are you following? 5 of you are. How about the rest of you? Got it? Okay. So with that, they raised the false flag coming in as the enemy. If you would, it took place in the West when they would dress the cavalry would dress in Indian warfare and go out and attack a wagon train so that they had a reason to send back to Washington, to send back in force with troops so they could wipe out the Indians. False flag terrorism. Pretending that you're the one who's doing good and assigning the evil to the other. What Satan does is he comes and attacks and then says, can you believe that God who would allow those things to happen? And over again we fall into that trap, don't we? If a tree falls on my house or my car, we call it an act of God. We don't say it's an act of Satan. Right? Even for insurance purposes. When you look at the full picture, though, what God does is he comes and pulls back the mask of the enemy who's been there from the beginning and who continually lashes out to cause pain and suffering. And he helps us to see that that same enemy blames God for all that suffering. Satan tells us what we want to hear. He paints a better life with him. Once we sign on the dotted line, the fine print that makes our life a living hell becomes visible, and we realize what we've gotten ourselves into. Jesus pulls off the devil's disguise as Lucifer, the deceiver. He does it in parable after parable. When the garden starts growing, weeds grow beside the beautiful plants. The master servants question him, Master, did you not sow good seeds in your field? How then are there weeds? He said to him, an enemy has done this. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. Did you catch that? It helps it to make plain that Satan is the one who sows evil and causes pain and breaks up things in life and causes computers to get wet. And we know where it's from. When a woman seeks Jesus for healing, Jesus announces that Satan had bound her these long 18 years. How many of the sicknesses that we have and the pains and struggles we have, do we blame, do we actually think, do we realize originate with Satan? Like Job's friends, we often shake our fists at God for the things that happen in our life as if God is the one who's caused it. Declaring God's brought the pain in. And even with good intending Christians, they come and share. And I've heard them share, God's punishing wickedness. Or He's refining you to strengthen your character. Or tearing someone down in order to glorify Himself. It's telling of our own understanding of God when we share that kind of counsel with others. You would have been part of Job's friends and part of Job's family, his wife who gave him that same kind of a message. Job, it's your fault. Satan's role in suffering. God allows Satan to act in order to reveal Satan's true character. God gives permission for Satan to be involved in this process in order that we can see who he is, so that the onlooking universe might see the results of a world under the hand of the fallen rebel. If you would, this world is like a petri dish. You know what you do with a petri dish? You put the bacteria in and you watch it till it develops, till it shows what it is. Till it reveals itself, till it grows to the place that you can recognize it. This earth is a petri dish for us to see the difference between the character of God and the character of Satan. Defying God. What if Satan claimed that God, as a dictator, unjustly forced his law and rule on the angels and would have a better life apart from him? What if the charges that Satan made were that God, in jealousy, forced Satan from heaven? Can you see the whole picture? Satan saying, look, God's a dictator. This almighty power who's forcing himself on us. We really don't even have a choice. Look at how he is and look at who he is. Now what happens if God steps forward and destroys Satan? It'll only add credence to those charges. So instead, God has a different plan. To let Satan's character play out. In 1 Corinthians 4:9 it says, "For we are made a spectacle unto the world and to angels and to men." We're made a spectacle unto the world. Actually, 1 Corinthians 9 in the Message Bible says it this way: "It seems to me that God has put us who bear his message on stage in a theater in which no one wants to buy a ticket, where something everyone else stands around and stares at like an accident in the street. We are the theater of the universe, while everybody's looking in and watching the character of God and the character of Satan play out. And the battle is not just over the earth, the battle's over us. And God looks and says, have you considered my man Jim? Have you considered my man Greg? Have you considered my daughter Sylvia? You see, they still worship me. Even with all that's gone on and all that you charge, they still trust me. God didn't create an evil angel. He created Lucifer, son of the dawn, according to Isaiah 14:12. He created a guardian cherub, Ezekiel 28:14. At God's right hand, he stood as one of the bodyguard for God himself. His right hand, I hesitate to say man, his right hand messenger. His right hand extension of himself. Ezekiel 28:14, I have ordained and appointed you as the mighty angelic guardian. You had access to the holy mount of God and walked among the stones of fire. You're there in the presence of God's holiness. But his pride dethroned the Lord from his life, and he maneuvered to exalt himself to the status of godhood. Sin enters the universe when love gives way to selfishness. We make sin this big religious term, and I'm almost embarrassed that we do, because in doing that, we've all but missed what it really means. Sin is putting you back on the throne and making selfishness rule in your life and all of the aspects on that. And love is just the opposite. Love is selflessness. You can't do selfless acts without the one who is selfless living in your life. That means all the deeds that you do, all the actions that you do, unless they're deeds from heart, unless they're heart obedience, they're just sour fruit. All those little good deeds that you try to turn in, all those things that you try to do, you see, no action will be acceptable to God unless it's from the heart. Heart obedience is God's call. And we can't make our heart that way. That was what this morning's talk was about. Sin entered the universe when love gave way to selfishness, and it does the same in our heart. The campaign of innuendo, suspicion, and doubt drew a contingency of angels to Satan, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And Satan, as he's here on this earth, incites mankind to reject God. It's just how he works. From the time of Adam and Eve to, if you would, Luke 22, then Satan enters into the heart of Judas Iscariot, who is one of the 12 apostles. What did he do with with Judas once he got him? What did Satan do with Judas once he got him? He does everything he can to separate him from the person of God and has him destroy himself. And virtually that's Satan's end goal: destruction. So when we look at the picture or the contrast of the great controversy, that's the whole picture of evil. Well, I should say that's the center of the picture of evil and what's going on. You see, there are two powers in this world warring over us. And just a little earlier this evening, I was talking to one of the folks here about a book called This Present Darkness, and it talks about that battle that goes on a personal level. If you haven't read Frank Peretti's book, I would encourage you, just from the fact of helping to see the great controversy personalized. And the work that goes on there is that struggle between right and wrong and good and evil, and trusting God or rejecting God in each of our lives, in every decision, in every action, in every day. If you take the great controversy then, and by the way, we talk about the things that we have as a church and the Sabbath as being prominent, and I believe that it is, and I believe that it's excellent, but you know that message that I think is the most significant? The great controversy message. Because it clears up God's character immediately once we understand it. And by the way, we're unique. We're unique among Christendom with the understanding of the great controversy. It's something we should be shouting from the mountaintops. Oh, not just the book of great controversy, but the whole picture of the great controversy, the struggle between God and Satan through all time, and that's going on today. But to that, I would add 4 other concepts that help us to understand the character of God. The first is that great controversy that we talked about, right? That's the baseline. I'd add 4 to that. One is free will. In James 1:14 and 15, it says, "But each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when that lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it has run its course, brings forth death." You see, the contrast is that we can rely on our natures that are broken away from God. We can rely on our natures, and our natures in themselves are selfish. So we don't even need Satan to tempt us because we're selfish by nature. My sweet little Davina granddaughter, I was able to work her into a sermon, right? My sweet little Davina grandma, if you pull out her little pacifier, that sweet little smile goes away. Nobody taught her that. She just knows what she wants. When you look at the picture, it says we're enticed by our own lust, by our own nature. The opposite is also true. Do not be deceived, my beloved. Every good gift and every perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow due to change. All the good things come from God, and all the things that are selfish come from Satan and the nature that we've inherited from him. Our promiscuity breeds STIs. Addicts steal. Abused repeat the cycle of abuse, and the drunk drivers kill. It's not Satan who entices them. It's our own choices that have caused us to follow through on those actions. So not only is there this great controversy struggle with Satan being active, we have natures that naturally have a propensity toward doing evil. And if left unchecked, untransformed, that's part of going on. So when I am a drunkard and I have liver problems, I can't blame God for that. Right? Right? I look at that whole picture and say, sometimes we blame God for our own actions. So besides the great controversy, there's this picture that we just spoke of our own ability to choose. And secondly, there's a source of life. Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." Now, how does that play into the whole picture of the great controversy and the great controversy struggle and evil and the fact that people are dying and suffering? It plays in this way. Sometimes we judge God's justice and mercy based on how long we or others get to live on this earth. An assessment that comes from a limited understanding. Sometimes we determine that God's not fair because somebody only got 4 days here, 10 days here, 30 years here. I just pause to think about it, and I'm not even sure if I've shared the story here, but it's one of my favorite. It comes to mind and helps me put things together. It's a story of children who played in the McDonald's playground. They were playing in the playground, and it came time after their meal for their parents to take them, and the kids didn't want to go, and the parents said, "We got to go." And they loaded up the kids in the car, and the kids were so angry at their parents. How could they be so thoughtless and abusive to take them away from this wonderful experience, not recognizing they just stopped at the McDonald's before going to Disneyland? Some of us judge God by how long we get at McDonald's, when He's got a Disneyland of eternity that He's offering us. And we're trying to decide, God, have you been fair? You only let my daughter live for a few minutes, or you let my son die early, or look at the age, he was only 65, or today it's 80, he was only 85. And the whole time, the thing is that we've judged by how long we get on this earth, and God has given us an eternity. And do we deserve it? I repeat, do we deserve it? It's all a gift from God. If I decide to give somebody $10 and then somebody else $10,000, does the person I gave the $10 to have the right to complain that I gave $10,000 to somebody else? Wasn't it all my money to begin with? If God is the source of life, we should praise Him for every moment that we have of life. And when we put in line with that He's promised us eternity, then how can we judge Him on how long we get here upon this earth? Since He grants all the opportunity for eternal life, does that not compensate for His limiting the time that is spent here on this earth with sin and suffering and heartache? How would you answer? That wasn't a rhetorical question. I'll ask it this way. Has God been fair in giving us life at all? When we determine someone's life has ended early or they died young, can we assume God has been unfair? And the answer is no. Where is God when it hurts? The answer is He's with us. The third thing is a desire to save us all. What we've often attributed to what's going on is that God is playing favorites. He looks at this one and that one and says, this one, I'm going to give him a little extra and this one not. But if God gives us each a blank check and lets us fill out that check at our own determining, we might put different amounts on it. What does it mean that God is not willing for any to perish? You know what it means? It means that God from His side has written that check out and handed it to you and said, I will fill your need for eternity if you just let me. From my side, I've signed the check. I've signed it. You just need to fill in the amount. God will use the pain, the suffering, the grief, the heartaches we experience to bring broken humanity to the onlooking universe back into life, receiving connection with Him. God's planning to use this whole thing for the purpose of restoring us to Him. As a Christian, we deal with the pain of this life in a short momentary affliction compared to the ultimate reality of eternity. It's like a finger prick of the pain and suffering when it's all stretched out before us. God doesn't just care about me. He cares about my wife and my children and my neighbors and my enemies, which tells me that when I'm looking at this whole thing, I can't just think about what's happening for me. I need to say, am I willing for God to use my life to go through suffering to bring somebody else to Him? If they can watch how I hold on to God like Job, right? Isn't that what God did? Have you considered my man Job? I trust Job enough, God says. I believe in Job enough to allow suffering to come in because I believe he's going to be faithful to me. That he's not just in love with me because of what he gets from me. Instead, Job loves me because of who I am. My relationship is so solid with Job, I count him as my number one evidence, Exhibit A. Could you be Exhibit B and C and D and E? And God wanting to use your life to be an opportunity to bring him up. I see the lawyer smiling. Opportunity to bring him up to say, listen, these are the evidences that show that there are people who love me based on who I am, not on what they get from me. They know me, they trust me. And finally, God takes sin on Himself. It would be different if we're the only ones that struggle with sin. When I saw this picture, it touched me immediately because I could see joy in their faces as they're going through the struggle of poverty. And it's as if through that poverty they were drawn closer, and you could see the love in their eyes as they're connecting with each other. If that's what it took to have me in that kind of relationship, I'd say, Lord, keep me poor. He made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. He made that possible so that a compassionate Father still exists in the midst of suffering. And when you ask, and I have had people ask over and over again, they say to me, Pastor, you talk about this good God, but how could there be an Auschwitz? How could God stepped back and done that? And I say, you have a only partial picture of God. You don't understand that there's a great controversy, struggle, and in order to let everybody make decisions, he's stepped back and said, Satan, you can use this earth as the opportunity to show how you would run things. You can be the God of this earth in that sense. I'll keep my people there, and we'll see who follows who. Auschwitz, what's the answer? Why isn't there a God there? With our first birth of my daughter, Shalina, Shelly had a really difficult delivery. And because of that delivery, she was incapacitated for several weeks, which meant I got to be Mr. Mom. And if you knew me, there's a reason why I didn't become a physician. I don't like to watch people in pain. I don't like to tie with suffering. I get angry when my own children get hurt. I'm just not good with pain in somebody else's life. I'm much better with my own pain than their pain. And I was responsible for taking my daughter to get her shots. So we came back in, and she had some bilirubin problems, and so they were requiring extra blood, and they had all of these things they were going through. And I was holding her in my arms, and she was crying. And I had to restrain her as they did all the procedures on her, and I was crying. And I could just see in her eyes saying, Daddy, why are you letting this happen to me? Don't you love me? Don't you care that I'm going through this? Where are you? My answer is, my darling, I'm here and you don't see it now, but this is going to be for your best good. There's something at the end, and I'm aching with you every step along the way. Where is God? He's on the cross, taking all our sins upon himself, seeing each pain and struggle that we go through. There, giving of himself and tying himself to us with a love that would never be broken. He's there showing us how much he loves us. And if you look at the cross, you see the contrast between God and Satan. God there giving himself and Satan taking him. God giving himself for us selflessly. That's love. And Satan only thinking about himself and trying to secure his own kingdom. The opposite of the character and the very place on the cross, and that seems to stand for how Satan won actually stands for Satan's loss, because love is seen in its greatest way. And you ask me, where is God when evil's there? And I say, he's right there on the cross, taking my sin upon himself. I could bless his name through everything, can't you? We want to have an opportunity to praise him in this point, and I would like you to stand with me as we do Blessed Be Your Name. I like the song because